Hey folks, we're on to book 19, in which Odysseus is going to meet his wife Penelope and talk to her. Remember, she thinks that he's an old beggar man, so what we've got here is dramatic irony. Book 19, Recognitions and a Dream. Now by Athena's side in the quiet hall, studying the ground for slaughter, Lord Odysseus turned to Telemachus. Remember that the suitors have all just gone home, and so Odysseus is now talking to his son. His son knows who he is. The arms, he said, harness and weapons must be out of sight in the inner room, and if the suitors miss them, be mild, just say, I had a mind to move them out of the smoke. They seem no longer. Ooh. The bright arms that Odysseus left at home when he went off to Troy. Here's what the fire's hot breath Here, where the fire's hot breath came, they had grown black and drear. One better reason struck me, too. Suppose a brawl starts up when you've been drinking. You might in madness let each other's blood, and that would stain your feast, your courtship. Iron itself can draw man's hands. It's interesting that we have a repetition of almost word for word what Odysseus said to Telemachus earlier. This is evidence of this being an oral tradition epic poem that was told around the campfire. It would have been just like a verse that the poet would have lifted from an earlier passage and put in here. Then he fell silent, and Telemachus obeyed his father's word. He called Eurycleia, the nurse, she's the oldest of the female servants, and told her, Nurse, go shut the women in their quarters while I shift father's armor back into the inner rooms. These beautiful arms, unburnished, caked with black soot in his years abroad. I was a child then. Well, I am not now. I want them shielded from the drought and smoke. And the old woman answered, It is time, child, you took an interest in such things. I'd wish you'd put your mind on all your house and chattels. But who will go along and hold a light? You said no maids, no torch-bearers. Telemachus looked at her and replied, Our friend here, a man who shares my heart, can bear a hand, no matter how far he is from home. He spoke, how far he is from home. Aha! Homer's having fun with this. He really is. He spoke so soldierly, her own speech halted on her tongue. Straight back she went to lock the doors of the women's hall. And now the two men sprang to work, father and princely son, loaded with round helms and studded bucklers, lifting long spears, while in their path Pallas Athena held up a golden lamp of purest light. Telemachus at last burst out. Oh, father, here is a marvel. All around I see the walls and roof beams, pedestals and pillars, lighted as though by a white fire blazing near. One of the gods of heaven is in this place. Then said Odysseus, the great tactician, Be still. Keep still about it. Just remember it. The gods who rule Olympus make this light. You may go off to bed now. Here I stay to test your mother and her maids again. Out of her long grief she will question me. Telemachus went across the hall and out under the light of the torches, crossed the court to the tower chamber where he had always slept. Here now again he lay, waiting for dawn, while in the great hall, by Athena's side, Odysseus waited with his mind on slaughter. Now, Odysseus keeps thinking about killing all the suitors. It keeps telling us that word slaughter over and over again to give us the idea that even though, he's about to talk to his wife, he's also considering how to best defeat all the suitors. And he's been thinking about that ever since he arrived as a beggar in his own house. Presently, Penelope from her chamber stepped in her thoughtful, that's just an awkward phrase, stepped in her thoughtful beauty. So might Artemis or golden Aphrodite have descended, and maids drew to the hearth her own smooth chair inlaid with silver whorls and ivory. The artisan, Icmalios, had made it long before, with a footrest in a single piece, and soft upon the seat a heavy fleece was thrown. Here by the fire the queen sat down. Her maids, leaving their quarters, came with white arms bare to clear the wine cups and bread, and move the trestle boards where men had lingered drinking. Fiery ashes out of the pine chip flares they tossed and piled on fuel for light and heat. And now, a second time, Melantho's voice rang brazen in Odysseus's ears. Remember, she's that evil maid who's sleeping with Eurymachus. Ah, stranger, are you still here, so creepy late at night, hanging about, looking the women over? You old goat, go outside and cuddle your supper. Get out, or a torch may kindle your behind. At this, Odysseus glared under his brows and said, Little devil, why pitch into me again? Because I go unwashed and wear these rags and make the rounds, but so I must, being needy. That is the way a vagabond must live. And do not overlook this. In my time, I too had luck, lived well, stood well with men, and gave alms, often to poor wanderers, like him you see before you. Aye, to all sorts, no matter in what dire want. I own servants, many, I say, and all the rest that goes with what men call prosperity. But Zeus, the son of Cronus, brought me down. Mistress, mend your ways, or you may lose all this vivacity of yours. What if her ladyship were stirred to anger? What if Odysseus came? And I can tell you there is hope of that. Or, if the man is done for, still his son lives to be reckoned with. By Apollo's will, none of you can go wantoning on the sly and fool him now. He's too old for that. Penelope, being near enough to hear him, spoke out sharply to her maid. Oh, shameless, through and through. And do you think me blind to your conquest? Here she's referring to Eurymachus and the maid sleeping together. It will cost your life. You knew I waited, for you heard me say it, waited to see this man in hall and question him about my lord. I am so hard beset. She turned away and said to the housekeeper, Eurynome, a bench. Spread a sheepskin to put my guest at ease. Now he shall talk and listen and be questioned. Willing hands brought a smooth bench and dropped a fleece upon it. Here the adventurer and king sat down. Then carefully Penelope began. So this is the reunion. We had a reunion scene between Odysseus and Telemachus where they talked to each other. And at first, Odysseus had to pretend to be a beggar before he was allowed to reveal himself by Athena. Now he's got to pretend to be a beggar with his wife. So you can see the internal struggle. I think Homer, who doesn't do a lot of talking about people's internal struggles and narration, is even going to mention it. So you want to pay attention to this. Willing hands brought a smooth bench and dropped a fleece upon it. Here the adventurer and king sat down. Then carefully Penelope began. Friend, let me ask you first of all, who are you? Where do you come from? Of what nation and parents were you born? And now he has to lie. He has to come up with a story. And he replied, My lady, never a man in the wide world should have a fault to find with you. Your name has gone out under heaven, like the sweet honor of some God-fearing king who rules in equity over the strong. His black lands bear both wheat and barley, fruit trees laden bright, new lambs at lambing time, and the deep sea gives great hauls of fish. By his good strategy, so his folk fare well. Oh, my dear lady, this being so, let it suffice to ask me of other matters, not my blood, my homeland. Do not enforce me to recall my pain, my heart is sore, but I must not be found sitting in tears here in another's house. It is not too well forever to be grieving. One of the maids might say, or you might think I had gone maudlin over cups of wine. And Penelope replied, Stranger, my looks, my face, my carriage were soon lost or faded when the Greeks crossed the sea to Troy. Odysseus, my lord among the rest, if he returned, if he were here to care for me, I might be happily renowned. Think about the irony of this speech, because she's literally talking to him right now and doesn't know it. But grief instead heaven sent me, years of pain. Sons of the noblest families on the islands, the Lycian, Same, wooded Zacynthos, what a tongue twister, Zacynthos, with native Ithacans are here to court me against my wish, and they consume this house. Can I give proper heed to a guest or suppliant or herald on the realm's affairs? How could I? Wasted with longing for Odysseus, while here they press for marriage. Ruses served my turn to draw the time out. First, a close-grained web. I had the happy thought to set up weaving on my big loom in the hall. I said that day, Young men, my suitors, now my lord is dead. Let me finish my weaving before I marry, or else my thread will have been spun in vain. It is a shroud I weave for Lord Laertes. When cold death comes to lay him on his bier, the country wives would hold me in dishonor if he, with all his fortune, lay unshrouded. I reached their hearts that way, and they agreed. So every day I wove on the great loom, but every night by torchlight I unwove it. And so for 3 years I deceived the Greeks. But when the seasons brought a 4th year on, as long months waned and the long days were spent, though through impudent folly in the slinking maids they caught me, clamored up to me at night, I had no choice then but to finish it. And now, as matters stand at last, I have no strength left to evade a marriage, cannot find any further way. My parents urge it upon me, and my son will not stand by while they eat up his property. He comprehends it, being a man full grown, able to oversee the kind of house Zeus would endow with honor. But you too confide in me. Tell me your ancestry. You were not born of mythic oak or stone. And the great master of invention answered, Oh, honorable wife of Lord Odysseus, must you go on asking about my family? Then I will tell you, though my pain be doubled by it, and whose pain would not if he had been long away as I have, and had hard roving in the world of men. But I will tell you even so, my lady. Now, note the truth. He makes up a story, but there are particular truths, especially about the way he feels and the way his journey has been, that are wrapped up in the story. The story is even more believable because so much of it is true. I mean, when you look at this, he says, who would not have as much pain as I have if they've been as long away from home and had such a hard journey? True. Uh, One of the great islands of the world in the mid-sea, in the wine dark sea, is Crete, spacious and rich and populous with 90 cities and mingling of tongues. Greeks there are found, along with Cretan hillmen of old stock, and Sidonians, Dorians, and three bloodlines, Pelagians, and one among their 90 towns is Knossos. Here lived King Minos, whom great Zeus received every 9th year in private council. Minos, the father of my father, Deucalion. Say it right. Two sons Deucalion had, Idomeneus, who went to join the Aretidae. That's... So, you don't need to know this, but the king of the Greeks is Agamemnon, and his dad was Atreus. And Agamemnon's brother was Menelaus, and so the Atreidae are like the sons of Atreus, and they were the two war leaders of the Greeks in the battle for the Trojan War. Doesn't matter, but if I'm going to read it, I might as well explain it to you. Before Troy, in the beaked ships of war, and then myself, Aethon by name, a stripling next to my brother, but I saw with my own eyes at Knossos, once Odysseus. So he's like, yeah, Odysseus came through Knossos on his way to Troy. Gales had caught him off Cape Melia, driven him southward to the coast of Crete, when he was bound for Troy. At Amnisos, hard by the holy cave of Ilithuia, he lay to, and dropped anchor in that open and rough roadstead, riding out the blow. Meanwhile, he came ashore, came inland, asking after Idomeneus, dear friends. He said they were, but now 10 mornings had already passed, 10 or 11 since my brother sailed. So I played host and took Odysseus home, saw him well lodged and fed, for we had plenty. Then I made requisitions, barley, wine, and beeves for sacrifice, to give his company abundant fare along with him. 12 days they stayed with us. Greeks, while that wind out to the north shut everyone inside. Even on land you could not keep your feet, such a fury was abroad. On the 13th, when the gale dropped, they put to sea. Now, all these lies he made appear so truthful that she wept as she sat listening. The skin of her pale face grew moist, the way pure snow softens and glistens on the mountains, thawed by south wind after powdering from the west. So good image here of her skin like snow, but another simile, which Homer loves to give us. Where was I? So her cheeks were wetted by these tears, shed for her lord, and he, close by her side, imagined how his heart ached for his lady, his wife in tears, and yet he never blinked. His eyes might have been made of horn or iron, for all that she could see. He had this trick, wept if he willed to, inwardly. So I like that Odysseus had developed a trick in which when he was sad, he could weep inwardly and show no sign of emotion outwardly. Well then, as soon as her relieving tears were shed, she spoke once more. I think that I shall say, friend, give me some proof, if it is really true, that you are host in that place to my husband, with his brave men, as you declare. Come, tell me the quality of his clothing, how he looked, and some particular of his company. Odysseus answered, and his mind ranged far. Lady, so long a time ago now lies between, it is hard to speak of it. Here in the 20th year since that man left the island of my father, but I shall tell what memory calls to mind. Purple cloak, and fleecy he had on, a double thick one. Then he wore a brooch made of pure gold, with twin tubes for the prongs, and on the face a work of art, a hunting dog, pinned a spotted fawn in agony between his forepaws. Wonderful to see how, being gold and nothing more, he bit the golden deer, convulsed with wild hoofs flying. Odysseus' shirt I noticed too, a fine, close-fitting tunic, like dry onion skin, so soft it was and shiny. Women there, many of them, would cast their eyes on it, but I might add, for your consideration, whether he brought these things from home or whether a shipmate gave them to him coming aboard, I have no notion. Some regardful host in another port, perhaps it was. Affection followed him. There were few Greeks like him, and I too made him gifts. A good bronze blade, a cloak with a lining, and broidered shirt, and sent him off with his trim ship with honor. A herald, somewhat older than himself, he kept beside him. I'll describe this man. Round-shouldered, dusky, woolly-headed, Eurybates his name was, and Odysseus gave him preferment over the other officers. He had a shrewd head, like the captain's own. Now, hearing these details, minutely true, she felt more strangely moved, and tears flowed until she had tasted her salt grief again. Then she found words to answer. Before this you won my sympathy, but now indeed you shall be our respected guest and friend. With my own hands I put that cloak and tunic upon him, took them folded from their place, and the bright brooch for ornament gone now. I will not meet the man again. Returning to his own home fields, unkind fate that sent him young in the black ship to see the misery at Ilion, unspeakable. And the master improviser answered. Note that we're getting different descriptions of Odysseus. He's a master of improvisation. He can make up lies like in a split second without thinking about it. And then he remembers the lies that he told. That's always a problem with lying, right? Like you tell a lie and you're like, oh, that was a good one. And then like 3 days later, you can't remember what it was and somebody asks you about it. But Odysseus never forgets his lies. I guess that's the benefit of writing a story. If it's written down, you can remember it exactly. The honorable wife of Odysseus, Laertes, that means son of Laertes. Doesn't matter, we'll just let it go. You need not stain your beauty with these tears, nor wear yourself out grieving for your own husband. Not that I can blame you. Any wife grieves for the man she married in her girlhood, lay with in love, bore children to, though he may be no prince like this Odysseus, whom they compare even to the gods. Sorry. But listen, weep no more, and listen. I have a thing to tell you, something true. I heard but lately of your lord's return. Heard that he is alive, not far away, among the Thesprotians, in their green land, amassing fortune to bring home. His company went down in shipwreck in the wine-dark sea off the coast of Thrinacia. Zeus and Helios held it against him that his men killed the kine of Helios. The crew drowned for this. He rode the ship's keel. Big seas cast him up on the island of the Phaeacians, godlike men who took him to their hearts. They honored him with many gifts and a safe passage home, or so they wished. Long since he should have been here, but he thought better to restore his fortune, playing the vagabond about the world, and no adventurer could beat Odysseus at living by his wits. No man alive. I had this from King Phaedon of Thesprotia, and tipping wine out, Phaedon swore to me the ship was launched, the seamen standing by to bring Odysseus to this land at last. But I got out to sea ahead of him, by the king's order. As it chanced, a freighter left port for the grain bins of Dulichium. Phaedon, however, showed me Odysseus' treasure. 10 generations of his heirs or more could live on what lay piled in that great room. The man himself had gone up to Dodona to ask the spelling leaves of the old oak what Zeus would have him do. Now, how to return to Ithaca after so many years, by stealth or openly. You see that he is alive and well, and headed homeward now, no more to be abroad, far from this island, his dear wife and son. Here is my sworn word about it. Witness this, God of the zenith, noblest of the gods, and Lord Odysseus' hearthfire now before me. I swear that these things turn out as I say. Between this present dark and one day's ebb, after the wane, before the crescent moon, Odysseus will come. Penelope, the attentive queen, replied to him, Ha, stranger, if what you say could ever happen, you would soon know our love, our bounty too. Men would turn after you to call you blessed. But my heart tells me what must be. Odysseus will not come to me. No ship will be prepared for you. We have no master, quick to receive and furnish a guest as Lord Odysseus was. Or did I dream him? Maids, come, wash him, make a bed for him.
bedstead and colored rugs and coverlets to let him lie warm into the gold of dawn. In the morning light you'll bathe him and anoint him, so that he'll take his place beside Telemachus feasting in the hall. If there be one man there to bully or annoy him, man wins no further triumph here. Burn though he may, how will you understand me, friend? How find in me, more than in common women, any courage or gentleness, if you are kept in rags and filthy at our feast? Men's lives are short. The hard man and his cruelties will be cursed behind his back and mocked in death. But one whose heart and ways are kind, of him strangers will bear report to the wide world, and distant men will praise him. This is a hospitality speech by Penelope about how important it is to treat people well in your own house, even if they're beggars. So I think that comes across pretty clearly. Warily, Odysseus answered, "Honorable lady, wife of Odysseus, Laertes' son, and a weight of rugs and a cover? Not for me. I've had none since the day I saw the mountains of Crete, white with snow, low on the sea line, fading behind me, as long oars drove me north. Let me lie down tonight as I've lain often, many a night unsleeping, many a time afield, on hard ground, waiting for pure dawn. No, and I have no longing for a foot bath either. None of these maids will touch my feet unless there's an old one, old and wise, one who has lived through suffering as I have. I would not mind letting my feet be touched by that old servant." And Penelope said, "Dear guest, no foreign man so sympathetic ever came into my house, no guest more likable, so wry and humble are the things you say. I have an old maidservant, ripe with years, one who in her time nursed my lord. She took him into her arms the hour his mother bore him. Let her then wash your feet, though she is frail. Come here, stand by me, faithful Eurycleia, and bathe your master, I almost said, for they are of an age, and now Odysseus' feet and hands would be enseamed like his. Men grow old soon in hardship." That's super ironic too, because it is Odysseus himself. Hearing this, the old nurse hid her face between her hands and wept hot tears and murmured, "Oh, my child, I can do nothing for you. How Zeus hated you! No other man so much. No use, great heart, oh faithful heart, the rich thigh bones you burned to Zeus, who praised and lighted, and no man ever gave more to Zeus with all your powers for green age. A tall son reared to manhood, there's no day of homecoming for you. Stranger, some woman in some far off place, perhaps, have mocked my lord when he'd come home, as how these strumpets mock you here. No wonder you would." That's ironic too. Like the ironies come thick and fast here. Um, "No wonder you would keep clear of all their whorishness and have no bath. But here I am, the Queen Penelope, Icarios' daughter, bids me. So let me bathe your feet, to serve my lady, to serve you too. My heart within me stirs, mindful of something. Listen to what I say. Strangers have come here, many through the years. But no one ever came, I swear, who seemed so like Odysseus, body, voice, and limbs as you do." She's like, "You remind me of Odysseus." Right? And Odysseus is like, "Oh, snap." Ready for this, Odysseus answered, "Old woman, that is what they say. All who have seen the two of us remark how like we are, as you yourself have said, and rightly too." Then he kept still, while the old nurse filled up her basin, glittering in the firelight. She poured cold water in, then hot. But Lord Odysseus whirled suddenly from the fire to face the dark. The scar. He had forgotten that. She must not handle his scarred thigh, or the game was up. But when she bared her lord's leg, bending near, she knew the groove at once. An old wound, a boar's white tusk inflicted on Parnassus years ago. He had gone hunting there in company with his uncles and Autolycus, his mother's father, a great thief and swindler, by Hermes' favor, for Autolycus pleased him with burnt offerings of sheep and kids. The god acted as his accomplice. Well, Autolycus, on a trip to Ithaca, arrived just after his daughter's boy was born. In fact, he had no sooner finished supper than Nurse Eurycleia put the baby down on his own lap and said, "It is for you now to choose a name for him, your child's dear baby." The answer to her prayers, Autolycus replied, "My son-in-law, my daughter, call the boy by the name I tell you. Well, you know my hand has been against the world of men and women. Odium and distrust I've won. Odysseus should be his given name. When he grows up, when he comes visiting his mother's home? Under Parnassus, where my treasures are, I'll make gifts and send him back rejoicing. Odysseus in due course went for the gifts, and old Autolycus and his sons embraced him with welcoming sweet words, and Amphithea, his mother's mother, held him tight and kissed his head and his fine eyes. The father called on his noble sons to make a feast, and going about it briskly they led in an ox of 5 years, whom they killed and flayed and cut into bits for roasting on the skewers. This is a long digression, but let's just keep reading it. Why not? With skilled hands, with care, they shared it out. So all the day until the sun went down, they feasted to their heart's content. At evening, after the sun was down and dusk had come, they turned to bed and took the gift of sleep. When the young dawn spread in the eastern sky, or fingertips of rose, the men and dogs went hunting, taking Odysseus. They climbed Parnassus's rugged flank, mantled in forest, entering amid the high windy folds at noon, when Helios beat upon the valley floor. And on the winding ocean, whence he came with hounds questing ahead, in open order, the sons of Autolycus went down a glen, Odysseus in the lead behind the dogs, pointing his long-shadowed spear. Before them a great boar lay hid in the undergrowth, in a green thicket, proof against the wind. So this is all, in case you've lost the thread of what's going on, this is a story of when Odysseus went to visit his grandfather as a boy, and they went on a boar hunt, and he got a horrible scar on his thigh from the boar's tusk. And we're getting the story of the boar hunt when Odysseus was Telemachus's age, or maybe younger. Let's see. Before them, a great boar lay hidden in the undergrowth, in a green thicket, proof against the wind or sun's blaze, fine, sober, the needling sunlight, impervious, too, to any rain. So dense the cover was, heaped up with fallen leaves. Patter of hounds' feet, men's feet woke the boar as they came up, and from his woody ambush, with razor back bristling and raging eyes, he trotted and stood at bay. Odysseus, being on top of him, had the first shot, lunging to stick him, but the boar had already charged under the long spear. He hooked aslant with one white tusk and ripped out flesh above the knee, but missed the bone. Odysseus' second thrust went home by luck, his bright spear passing through the shoulder joint, and the beast fell, moaning as life pulsed away. Autolycus' tall son took up the wounded, working skillfully over the Prince Odysseus to bind his gash, and with a rune they staunched the dark flow of blood. Then downhill swiftly they all repaired to the father's house, and there tended him well. So well they soon could send him with grandfather Autolycus' magnificent gifts, rejoicing over the seat of Ithaca. His father and the lady Anticlea welcomed him, and wanted all the news of how he got his wound. So he spun out his tale, recalling how the boar's white tusk caught him when he was hunting on Parnassus. This was the scar the old nurse recognized. She traced it under her spread hands, then let go, and into the basin fell the lower leg, making the bronze clank, sloshing the water out. Then joy and anguish. This is an oxymoron, sort of, like she feels both joy at seeing Odysseus in their house and anguish at how old and beggarly he looks, seized her heart. Her eyes filled up with tears, her throat closed, and she whispered, with hand held out to touch his arm, "Oh, yes, you are Odysseus. Ah, dear child, I could not see you until now, not until I knew my master's very body with my hands." Her eyes turned to Penelope with a desire to make her lord, her husband, known, in vain, because Athena had bemused the queen so that she took no notice, paid no heed. At the same time, Odysseus' right hand gripped the old throat. His left hand pulled her near, and in her ear he said, "Will you destroy me, nurse, who gave me milk at your own breast? Now, with a hard lifetime behind, I've come in the 20th year home to my father's island. You found me out, as a chance was given to you. Be quiet. Keep it from the others, else I warn you, and I mean it too. If by my hand God brings the suitors down, I'll kill you, nurse or not, when the time comes to kill the other women." Wow, that's pretty intense. Odysseus is so afraid he's going to be found out. He grabs her by the throat, drags her up next to his mouth, and he's like, "You don't give me away, old woman, or I kill you." Like, that's intense stuff. Eurycleia kept her wits and answered him, "Oh, what mad words are these you let escape you, child? You know my blood, my bones are yours. No one could whip this out of me. I'll be a woman turned to stone, iron I'll be. And let me tell you, too, mind now, if a god cuts down the arrogant suitors by your hand, I can report to you on all the maids, those who dishonor you and those who are innocent. But in response
In response, the great tactician said, "Nurse, no need to go tell me the tales of these. I will have seen them, each one for myself. Trust in the gods. Be quiet. Hold your peace." Silent, the old nurse went to fetch more water, her basin being all spilled. When she had washed and rubbed his feet with golden oil, he turned, dragging his bench again to the fireside for warmth, and hid the scar under his rags. Penelope broke the silence, saying, "Friend, allow me one brief question more. You know, the time for bed, sweet rest is coming soon. If only that warm luxury of slumber would come to enfold us in our trouble. But for me, my fate at night is anguish and no rest. By day, being busy, seeing to my work, I find relief sometimes from loss and sorrow. But when night comes, and all the world's abed, I lie in mine alone, my heart thudding, while bitter thoughts and fears crowd on my grief. Think of how Pandaros's daughter, pale forever, sings as the nightingale in the new leaves, through these long, quiet hours of night, on some thick flowered orchard bough in spring. How she rills out and tilts her note high now, now low, mourning for Idolos, whom she killed in madness, her child and her lord Zethos' only child. My forlorn thought flows variable as her song, wondering. Now that's an allusion to the story of why we have nightingales, why there are these birds that sing beautifully at night. And you can go look it up if you want. The names are right there. But it had to do with a woman who killed her son, and as punishment was turned into a nightingale. We've had a lot of stories like this. Where was it? Oh, and Keats, John Keats did a famous romantic poem called Ode to a Nightingale. That's a big allusion to this, so it's worth reading too. Shall I stay beside my son and guard my own things here, my maids, my hall, to honor my lord's bed and a common talk? Or had I best join fortunes with a suitor, the noblest one, most lavish in his gifts? Is it now time for that? So she asks Odysseus the question of, should she marry one of the suitors? Is it finally time for her to make a choice? That's a interesting question for her to ask him. She's not done with the question yet, but that's the core, that's the central nugget of her question. My son, being still a callow boy, forbade marriage or absence from my lord's domain, but now the child is grown up man. He too begins to pray for my departure. Aghast at all the suitors gorge on, listen, interpret me this dream. From a water's edge, 20 fat geese have come to feed on grain beside my house, and I delight to see them. But now a mountain eagle with great wings and crooked beak storms in to break their necks and strew their bodies here. Away he soars into the bright sky, and I cry aloud, all this in a dream. I wail, and round me gather softly braided Greek women, mourning because the eagle killed my geese. Then down out of the sky he drops to a cornice beam with a mortal voice telling me not to weep. Be glad, says he, renowned Icarios' daughter. Here is no dream, but something real as day, something about to happen. All these geese were suitors, and the bird was I. See now, I am no eagle, but your lord come back to bring inglorious death upon them all. As he said this, my honeyed slumber left me. Peering through half-shut eyes, I saw the geese in the hall still feeding at the same trough. So that's her dream. She had this dream that there were a bunch of geese eating all the food in her hall, and an eagle comes down and kills them all and then tells her he's her husband. It's pretty clear what the dream means. I don't know why she's asking this wanderer to interpret it, but whatever. The master of subtle ways straight replied, My dear, how can you choose to read the dream differently? Has not Odysseus himself shown you what is to come? Death to the suitors, sure death too. Not one escapes his doom. Penelope shook her head and answered, Friend, many and many a dream is mere confusion, a cobweb of no consequence at all. 2 gates for ghostly dreams there are, one gateway of honest horn and one of ivory. Issuing by the ivory gate are dreams of glimmering illusion, fantasies, but those that come through the solid polished horn may be borne out, if mortals only know them. I doubt it came by horn, my fearful dream, too good to be true. That for my son and me, but one thing more I wish to tell you. Listen carefully. It is a black day, this that comes. Odysseus' house and I are to be parted. I shall decree a contest for the day. We have 12 axe heads.
In his time, my lord could line them up, all 12, at intervals, like a ship's ribbing. Then he'd back away, a long way off, and whip an arrow through. Now I'll impose this trial on the suitors. The one who easily handles and strings the bow and shoots through all 12 axes I shall marry, whoever he may be. Then look my last on this first love's beautiful brimming house. But I'll remember, though I dream it only. So she says, look, I've got to marry one of these guys, and I've come up with one last contest to help me choose the one to marry. So this challenge of the axe heads is actually kind of complicated, and you need to be able to visualize it. So let's talk some images. There's a couple of different ways to look at this. The traditional one is that an axe head, has a place where the shaft, the handle goes through, and it's a little circle in the middle of it, and that we're going to line up 12 axe heads in a line like this, and each of the suitors is going to take this bow of Odysseus's and have to shoot an arrow, and the arrow's got to travel through all 12 of them and out the other side. And the idea is it has to be a strong shot because gravity is going to pull on that arrow. And in order for it to take a straight line through all 12 axe heads, not only has it to be perfectly angled, but it can't lose speed. So it's got to be a strong shot and perfectly shot to go through it. And Odysseus used to be able to do it. In some versions, it looks more like this. We got axes that come down like this, and so there's a little bit of a bigger hole to shoot through than, these ones, where it's a much more tricky shot. So you can pick whichever way you want to pick, but that's sort of the image that you should have in her head. Now, this is a contest, maybe another impossible challenge that she's setting up for these suitors to do, to hold off on marrying them yet again, or maybe she means it in earnest and she thinks one of them can accomplish this. Whatever the case, she says, this is my thought, and Odysseus is going to weigh in on it, which is, again, ironic because she thinks he's just a random beggar man, but it's really her husband. Odysseus said, "Dear honorable lady, wife of Odysseus, son of Laertes, let there be no postponement of the trial. Odysseus, who knows the shifts of combat, will be here. Aye, he'll be here long before one of these lads can stretch or string that bow or shoot to thread the iron." "Grave and wise," Penelope replied, "if you were willing to sit with me and comfort me, my friend, no tide of sleep would ever close my eyes. But mortals cannot go on forever sleepless. This the undying God's decree for all who live and die on earth, kind furrowed earth. Upstairs I go, then, to my single bed, my sighing bed, wet with so many tears, after my lord Odysseus took ship to see that misery at Ilion, unspeakable. Let me rest there, you here. You can stretch out on the bare floor, or else command a bed." So she went up to her chamber, softly lit, accompanied by her maids. Once there, she wept for Odysseus, her husband, till Athena cast sweet sleep over her eyes. Right. So, that's the end of the chapter. Tomorrow we're going to have a contest where the suitors are supposed to shoot arrows through axe heads after stringing Odysseus's bow, and we're going to see how that goes. That's where we'll jump to on our next video. And I'll summarize Book 20, Signs and a Vision, because I don't think it's all that important. We've got most of the important stuff taken care of. All right, thanks. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.